Hi everyone, I'm Chong Ling, an education-focused lecturer from the School of Biotechnology and Biomolecular Sciences, Faculty of Science. Now I'm here with you today to share with you some of my experience how I read my experience feedback. Now, I generally utilize four approaches. So the first approaches that I've actually used is to make sure that before I start, I identify my primary intention or purposes. Now, this is how I set up strategic vision or goal so that I can go in and read my experience with a purpose. Now, for instance, what I would do when I first inherited a new course, there are something that I can't change. Now, for this thing that I can't change, I wasn't too sure if they're working well. I would try to look for cues from my students and from their feedback about whether should I keep them or whether should I change them. Now, in another different scenario, if I'm having a new course and I've changed something in it, I also want to find out whether these changes are useful, actually good for the students. So these are something that I primarily trying to find out from my experience feedback. Now, the other thing that I also consider in looking at my experience feedback is that, am I prepared for promotions? If I am, what are the proof of excellence? And my experience feedback is really good for that purpose. So for the second approach that I do is to make sure that I'll never treat a feedback as an issue, but I will treat it as a challenge. Now, why do I say that? Is because issue or a problem when it comes to feedback is always associated with negativity. Now, I always try to keep an open mind, and I want to turn this negativity into something that could be positive, which I want to call it a challenge. Now, challenge means that it is something that we can try to overcome. Now, personally, I would treat every student's comment to represent a new opportunity for us to improve or diversify our teaching approaches. Now, most importantly, we want to make sure that when we try to read my experience feedback, we have time to pause in between, absorb this negativity, and reflect on it so that how and strategize ourselves to create the positive impact from it. So my third approach in how I read my experience feedback is to make sure that I've always engaged a structured approach. So I always put a structure to it so that I know what's the first step, second step, and the following steps. Now, something that I would like to share with you today is Coda's 8 steps approach to leading change. I come across this from my graduate certificate of university learning and teaching program, so it's very useful and I'm really happy to share with you today. Now, the first thing that I do want to do and always do is that I make sure I take note of any actionable items. That is something that we can try to create very easy wins. Easy wins is something that creating a very lasting impact in your students if you can make that change that can improve the course delivery. Now, the second thing that I would do during the process is that I will always make sure that I have an end-of-term debriefing session with my teaching teams, my course coordinators or lecturers, and most of all, my demonstrator. Now, what do I do from it is that I actually try to build a guiding coalitions to try to communicate for buy-in in Coda's sense. Now, what are we trying to do there is to make sure that people that we usually work with can all come together to try to improve the course together. Now, from the very beginning of finding the actionable item, now we get people to work together with us. We will try to set up a plan on this actionable item. Okay, so that is what in Coda's approach called develop vision. We want to always set up goal, just like my first approach, very important. Once we have the goal, once we have the right people, now we try to empower the right people to do this process. Now, what do I do is to involve my demonstrator during the process of resource creation. They are the people who are on the ground helping us teaching. So we will try to also empower them to make sure that we are all improving our teaching delivery together. Now, the last thing to do is to also make sure that you organize a pre-term planning to review the feedback and making sure that these changes that you do, these people that you bring together are all creating a sustainable change for your course. So my last approach, which is the fourth one here, is to make sure that we actually appreciate the process of changing. So never treat the change as a one-off treatment. We are always engaged in an iterative process. We have that feedback loop. We call it a loop because we can always evaluate the process of change, and then we're always trying to find something that doesn't work, and we'll always improve it. Now, in Kotter's approach, we try to make change stick. So after I discussed the 4 different approaches, now here is something that I want to share with you that might sound a bit more controversial. Now, what I do is not only looking at my experience feedback, but I've also trying to find out how I can best addressing this feedback to the right people. Now, why do I say that? Because in my experience feedback, a lot of the time we collect the feedback from our students. Now, unfortunate thing is that we can never able to implement the change to the students who actually give us that feedback, which is why I would like to share with you my approach in how I can improve the course immediately using not only my experience, but also True Students Ambassador program. Now, this is a program when I begin to invite students to join me as a Students Ambassador for the course at the start of the term. Now, how do I get to my students is to tell them that if anyone would like to carry on that extra leadership opportunity, join me in the conversations, have a chat about the course. So what I do is to invite feedback from our Students Ambassador. They are the gutsy students who are able to give us that specific feedback. Now, the key thing here is that Students Ambassador are not the minority who are going to give us that feedback, but instead, they are the conduit between our students cohort. So teaching team on one side, students cohort on one side. Now the Students Ambassador will sit right in the middle, working with the teaching team directly. Now, how can we do that is to establish that project group sort of environment between our teaching team and also the Students Ambassador. When they communicate the feedback to us within the project group, within the Students Ambassador program, now what we do is not just listening to the Students Ambassador, but we invite and encourage our Students Ambassador to go out there and communicate to the wider students cohort. Are these feedback real? Are these feedback actually represent the wider cohort, or is it just coming from a minority of the students' voice? Okay, from that process, we then bring a collective feedback back to the project team, which is established through the Students Ambassador program. Now, the project team will critically analyze the feedback that's being received. We are trying to identify the actionable item that can then deliver instant improvement to the course. Now, this is basically simulating the process of Kotter's 8 steps change approach. We are creating that guiding coalitions between teaching team and also our Students Ambassador. We are developing visions to find actionable items to deliver instant improvement. Now, this is how students' feedback can be implemented and making change within the same particular term that we call it, to make sure that we are now successfully able to deliver instant improvement to the students. Now, obviously, we'll try to keep working until the end of the term. We only have a 10 weeks term at UNSW, which is quite relatively short. So we are trying to make sure the change that we implemented will be sustainable, and also making sure that it will carry on to the next iteration of the learning itself. Now, that is my sort of approaches to not only utilizing my experience feedback as a way to improve my course, but I also share with you a controversial version in how I capitalize not just my experience, but also I'm trying to invite Students Ambassador to try to beat the system altogether. I hope that sort of information will help you work out how you can best utilizing your myExperience feedback. Thank you.